He offered $1 million for a 30-day marriage, but on day 31, he couldn't let her go. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain drizzled softly over downtown Chicago, tracing silver lines down the cafe windows. Inside, the air smelled of roasted coffee and wet pavement. At a corner table sat Eleanor Brooks, the billionaire CEO of Brooks Holdings, poised, elegant, and unreadable. Across from her, Mark Davis, a worn-out law student with tired eyes and a threadbare jacket, clutched a folder of overdue bills. He had just finished his evening shift at a diner, unaware that this meeting would change everything about his life. Eleanor studied him quietly, her gaze calm and steady, the kind of look that made people sit straighter without knowing why. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and deliberate. "Mr. Davis," she began, "thank you for coming." Mark nodded, unsure whether to smile or panic. "You said it was important. This rawning is we do no sum in the matter out of an, because where we solve." "It is," she replied, sliding a sleek white envelope across the table. "Inside is an offer." He hesitated, fingertips brushing the envelope. "An offer for what?" Her tone did not waver. "Marriage. To me." The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, the sound of rain seemed to vanish. Mark blinked, certain he had misheard her. "I am sorry. What did you say?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "You heard correctly. This is not about romance, Mr. Davis. It is a legal arrangement, a contract. You will be compensated, and in return, you will help me protect what is mine." He stared at her, struggling to process what she had just said. "Why me? You do not even know me." "Sign and weigh. Little mander." "I know enough," she said, her expression unreadable. "You are educated, discreet, and, most importantly, desperate." Her eyes softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "Your mother's medical bills are overdue. Your apartment lease expires in 3 days. I am offering you a way out." Mark's throat tightened. He felt exposed, stripped bare under her precision. "So I would be your husband?" "For 1 year," she replied. "No intimacy, no emotional expectations, only appearances. You will attend public events, family gatherings, and a few press conferences. In return, your debts will be cleared, and you will receive $1 million. This," he laughed weakly, but it came out more like disbelief. "This is insane." "Is it?" Eleanor's eyes flickered with something challenge, maybe curiosity. "Sometimes, survival requires accepting the unthinkable." Mark's heart pounded. The envelope sat between them like a loaded gun. "Why are you really doing this?" "For control," she said simply. "My board wants to force a merger through marriage to stabilize the company's image after my brother's scandal. I refuse to be manipulated. This arrangement gives me leverage without giving anyone my heart." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the cafe filled the silence. Outside, the rain turned to a steady rhythm, soft against the glass. Finally, Eleanor pushed a pen toward him. "You have 24 hours to decide. Sign the contract and bring it to my office tomorrow at 10. Mark looked down at the pen, its gold tip gleaming beneath the amber light. Every instinct told him to walk away, yet his mother's pale face in the hospital bed flashed in his mind, along with the eviction notice taped to his door. Eleanor rose smoothly from her chair, her perfume crisp and cold, like rain on steel. "Think carefully, Mr. Davis. Some contracts are worth more than money. It is not Wayne." And with that, she left him sitting alone, the envelope still untouched on the table, the scent of power lingering in the air. Mark exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every choice pressing on his chest. He did not know it yet, but the moment he reached for that envelope, his life would no longer belong to him. The next morning, gray clouds hung low over Chicago, pressing against the skyline like a weight. The streets glistened with last night's rain as Mark Davis sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the white envelope that had kept him awake all night. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the edges of it, his reflection dim in the cracked window beside him. He had read the contract 3 times before dawn, Every clause, every signature line. 1 year. Public marriage. Confidentiality. Termination with full compensation. $1 million. Enough to pay for his mother's treatments, clear every debt, and start over. Yet the thought of it made his stomach twist. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling deep behind them. The hospital had called again at midnight. His mother's condition was worsening. The landlord's final notice sat pinned to the wall beside unpaid bills. Reality did not leave him much room for pride. By 7:30, Mark made his decision. At 9:59, he stood in the marble lobby of Brooks Holdings. Everything around him gleamed: polished floors, glass walls, and people in expensive suits moving with purpose. He felt painfully out of place in his worn jacket and scuffed shoes. The receptionist looked up, polite but cautious. "Good morning, sir. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Mark said quietly. "Mark Davis. Miss Brooks is expecting me." Her tone softened as she typed. "Top floor. Executive office. Good luck, Mr. Davis." The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, sealing him inside a mirror of his own reflection. Nervous, uncertain, yet determined. As the floors climbed, his pulse echoed louder than the hum of the elevator. When the doors opened, a woman in a navy skirt and sleek bun was waiting. "This way, Mr. Davis," she said. "Miss Brooks is ready for you." Eleanor Brooks sat behind a wide glass desk, her posture straight, her focus absolute. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline behind her. She did not rise when he entered, but her gaze lifted from a stack of documents with surgical precision. "You are early," she said. "I made my decision," Mark replied, clutching the folder in his hand. Her eyes flicked toward it. "And? I will do it." There was no surprise on her face, only quiet certainty. "I expected as much." She opened the folder before her, revealing 2 crisp copies of the contract. "You have read everything carefully?" "Yes," Mark said, his voice steady even as his chest tightened. "Good," she replied. "Then sign both copies." He took the pen she handed him, the same pen from the cafe, heavy and gold. His hand shook slightly as he pressed it to paper. The sound of ink scratching the page felt louder than his own heartbeat. When he finished, Eleanor signed her own name with flawless strokes. She closed the folder. "Welcome to our arrangement, Mr. Davis." Mark exhaled, unsure whether he should feel relief or dread. "Should I call you Mrs. Davis now?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Not yet. The ceremony will be this evening. It will be small, private, and efficient." "In chess? Efficient?" he repeated. "I do not waste time," she said, her tone clipped but not unkind. "My attorney will handle the legalities. You will be provided with attire and transportation." That afternoon, a black car appeared outside his apartment. Inside was a freshly pressed suit and a handwritten note in elegant script. "Wear this. Do not be late." By 7 o'clock, Mark stood inside a quiet courthouse lit by the warm glow of old chandeliers. The faint scent of rain still lingered in the air. Eleanor arrived moments later, radiant in a pearl-colored dress that shimmered softly under the lights. Her calm presence filled the room, steady and unshakable. The officiant, a man in his 60s with a solemn voice, began reading the vows. "Do you, Eleanor Brooks, take this man, Mark Davis, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she replied without hesitation. "And do you, Mark Davis, take this woman, Eleanor Brooks, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, quietly, "I do." The officiant signed the marriage certificate and handed it to Eleanor's lawyer. No flowers, no music, no guests, just ink, paper, and silence. Eleanor turned toward him, extending her hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Davis. From this moment, you are my husband. I expect punctuality, discretion, and respect. You will be compensated on the 1st of each month." Mark shook her hand. Her palm was cool, deliberate. "Understood. Then let us begin." Outside, rain had returned, thin and steady. A chauffeur opened the door to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The city lights reflected across its polished surface as it carried them north toward the gated Brooks estate. When they arrived, Mark stared in quiet disbelief. The mansion rose before him, white stone columns, trimmed hedges, fountains whispering in the dark. It was less a home than an empire made of glass and silence. Eleanor stepped out first, her heels clicking softly against the marble steps. "Welcome home," she said. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and wood polish. Portraits lined the hallway, faces of people who looked powerful and distant. A housekeeper led him upstairs to a guest suite overlooking the gardens. "This will be your room," Eleanor said. "Mine is down the hall. We will maintain separate quarters." "Of course," he replied. "Dinner is at 7. We will eat together when necessary for appearances. Otherwise, you may occupy yourself as you wish." When she left, the silence filled the space around him like water. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring that now rested on his finger. It gleamed faintly in the low light, a promise written in gold, signed not by love, but by survival. The days that followed moved in quiet precision, like every part of Eleanor Brooks's world. Breakfast was served at exactly 7. Meetings started at 9, and dinner was either at the long dining table under the chandelier or at another corporate event filled with strangers. Mark Davis learned the schedule, the tone, and the silence that came with living beside power. Every morning, he would pass her in the hallway, immaculate as ever. Tailored suit, hair in a perfect knot, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in that calm, decisive voice that left no room for hesitation. Every night, she came home late, carrying the same loneliness he had begun to recognize in himself. At first, they barely spoke. Their arrangement was simple: public appearances together, polite smiles, and silence when the cameras were gone. Yet small cracks began to form in the structure of that agreement. Sometimes she asked if he had eaten. Sometimes he asked if she had slept. Neither expected answers, but both kept asking. One evening, Mark walked past the library and heard faint music. The door was slightly open, and he saw Eleanor standing by the grand piano. Her fingers brushed the keys gently, hesitant at first, then more certain. The melody filled the room, soft, sad, and beautiful. It stopped suddenly when she noticed him watching. "I did not mean to interrupt," he said quietly. Eleanor shook her head. "I did not think anyone could hear. I used to play when I was young." "You are good," Mark said. "Why did you stop?" Her eyes drifted to the window. "Because life got louder." There was a long silence before she added, almost in a whisper, "Music does not belong in a boardroom." That night, the walls between them felt a little thinner. Over the next few weeks, their rhythm changed. They began sharing car rides to events. Sometimes she let him see her without the perfect mask, no makeup, hair tied back, exhaustion softening her edges. He found himself watching the way she looked out the window during those rides, the way her expressions seemed to fade between strength and sadness. At a gala downtown, surrounded by polished faces and flashing cameras, Mark stood beside her under the bright lights. Her hand rested on his arm, light but deliberate. They smiled for the photographers, every flash, sealing their illusion of perfection. But then someone near the champagne bar whispered loud enough for him to hear, "She really married a charity case." Eleanor's expression did not change, but her shoulders stiffened. The words cut deeper than she would admit. Before she could respond, Mark turned toward the man and said evenly, "That charity case graduated top of his class and happens to stand beside a woman powerful enough to own this room." The silence that followed was sharp and immediate. Eleanor glanced at him, her eyes filled with surprise and something that looked almost like pride. When the event ended, they drove home without speaking. The tension hung heavy until they reached the gates of the mansion. As the car stopped, she finally turned to him. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "No one talks to you like that and gets away with it." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "You are not what I expected, Mr. Davis." "Neither are you," he said with a small smile. For the first time since the day they met, she laughed quietly, genuinely. It was brief, but it broke the chill that had lived between them for weeks. Later that night, Mark found himself standing outside her office door, hesitating. Through the glass, he saw her asleep at her desk, papers scattered, the lamp still glowing. He covered her with a blanket before turning off the light. She did not wake, but her lips moved faintly, as if whispering thank you in her sleep. He stood there for a moment longer, realizing something he could not ignore. Somewhere between duty and affection, the lines of their contract were beginning to blur. The weeks rolled into months, and the boundaries of the contract grew harder to see. Mark Davis had learned how to navigate the polished world of Eleanor Brooks. But what surprised him most was how much of her world had begun to seep into his heart. He no longer felt like an outsider at the endless charity dinners or business luncheons. He began to understand her sharp humor, her unspoken rules, and the rare, fragile moments when she allowed herself to breathe. Sometimes when they returned home late from a gala, she would slip off her heels at the door, sigh, and lean against the marble wall with a soft laugh. It was in those moments, unguarded and human, that Mark forgot this was supposed to be a performance. One morning, Eleanor found him in the study, adjusting his tie before another foundation event. "You have learned quickly," she said. "A few months ago, you looked like you wanted to run from every camera." He smiled slightly. "Maybe I did, but now, I just look at you and remember why I am here." Her expression faltered for a second, but she quickly looked away. "Good. Then remember that tonight matters. The press will be watching." In unforgettable presses. That evening, they attended a corporate celebration downtown, surrounded by journalists and investors. Eleanor looked radiant in a navy gown that shimmered beneath the lights, her presence commanding every camera in the room. Mark stood beside her, steady and calm. He was supposed to be silent support, but when the reporters turned their questions toward him, he answered with quiet confidence. One journalist asked, "Mr. Davis, what has it been like adjusting to such a different lifestyle?" He glanced at Eleanor and replied, "It is not about lifestyle. It is about learning the strength behind the woman everyone thinks they already know." The crowd murmured, impressed. Eleanor's eyes met his briefly. There was a warmth in them she could no longer hide. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the mansion had gone silent, she poured 2 glasses of wine and joined him by the fire. "You handled yourself well," she said softly. "You have become very good at pretending." Mark looked at her over the rim of his glass. "Maybe I am not pretending anymore." Her hand froze halfway to her lips. "Do not say that." "Why not?" he asked gently. "Because it is not part of the contract?" Her silence said more than words could. She set her glass down and walked toward the window, her reflection fractured by the rain streaking down the glass. "You think this life is simple," she said quietly. "It is not. People in my world do not forgive love. They use it." Mark stood, moving closer. "Maybe they use it because they have forgotten what it feels like." Eleanor turned, her voice sharp but trembling. "You do not understand what I have built. Everything I am is because I stayed untouchable." "Maybe that is the problem," he said. "Maybe you built walls so high that you cannot tell who is on your side anymore." Her eyes glistened, anger and fear tangled in one breath. "Do not push me, Mark." He stopped, realizing how close they were standing. The air between them felt charged, fragile. "I am not pushing," he said softly. "I am trying to see you." For a long moment, neither moved. Then she turned away, her voice a whisper. "Good night, Mr. Davis." When he returned to his room, sleep refused to come. He kept replaying her words, her eyes, the quiet ache in her voice. The lines that once defined their arrangement had vanished. The next day, headlines filled every screen. Brooks Harris's marriage under scrutiny, anonymous source claims, contract union. The story spread fast, cameras gathered outside the estate gates, and shareholders demanded answers. Eleanor called an emergency meeting with her board. Mark watched from the corner as she defended herself, calm but furious. "My personal life is not your leverage," she said coldly. "You will not dictate how I live." Afterward, in her office, she closed the door and sank into her chair, the mask finally cracking. "They will destroy me for this," she whispered. Mark stepped closer. "Then let them try. You have nothing to hide anymore." Her voice broke slightly. "You do not understand. If the board believes the marriage was a contract, they will force me out." "Then tell them the truth," he said. "Tell them it stopped being one." Eleanor looked up, tears shining in her eyes, her voice trembling for the first time since he had met her. "And if they do not believe me?" Mark reached for her hand. "Then I will make them believe." It was the first time she let him hold her hand without resistance. The storm outside raged against the windows, thunder rolling through the night. For the first time, neither of them cared who might be watching. The scandal did not fade. Within days, the media turned their marriage into a headline circus. News anchors debated whether Eleanor Brooks had staged the wedding to protect her empire. Tabloids printed photos of Mark Davis arriving at the courthouse months earlier, labeling him a paid husband. Every time he turned on the television, his own face stared back at him, framed by cruel captions. Inside the Brooks estate, the tension grew heavy. Staff whispered. Calls from investors came every hour. Even the air felt charged with judgment. Eleanor spent her days in meetings, defending her integrity to people who had once praised her. One evening, Mark found her standing on the balcony, the wind tangling her hair, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The city lights stretched endlessly below, cold and distant. "They want me to step down," she said quietly, not turning around. "The board is calling an emergency vote tomorrow morning." Mark stepped closer. "Then fight it," she laughed bitterly. "Fight what, Mark? Perception? A rumor is more powerful than truth in my world." "Then change the story," he said firmly. "Tell them everything. Tell them how this started. Tell them why it is not fake anymore." Eleanor turned toward him, her expression raw. "If I tell them that, I lose everything." He shook his head. "No, you will lose the mask. There is a difference." For a moment, she just looked at him, the steel in her eyes softening. Then she whispered, "You still believe in me." "I never stopped," he replied. The next morning, the boardroom was full. Suits, cameras, tension so thick it silenced even the air. Eleanor walked in wearing a simple black dress. No jewelry, no armor. Mark followed, standing behind her as the whispers began. "Miss Brooks," the chairman started, "we must address the question of your marriage's authenticity. Do you deny that it was a contractual arrangement?" The room fell silent. Every flash of a camera captured her stillness. She drew a slow breath and said clearly, "Yes, it began as a contract. I made that choice. I needed control in a world that only respected power. But what happened after that was not part of any deal." The reporters leaned forward, their pens ready. Eleanor continued, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "The man I married taught me what real integrity looks like. He stood beside me when it would have been easier to walk away. You can call it scandal if you want. I call it the truth." The room erupted with questions. Cameras clicked like rain. But Eleanor did not flinch. She reached for Mark's hand openly, deliberately, and said, "This is my husband, not my contract." For a heartbeat, everything went still. The chairman cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. The vote that followed was close, but it saved her position by a single count. When they stepped out of the building, reporters surrounded them. Microphones pushed toward their faces. Eleanor paused, her hand still in Mark's. "Are you saying you are in love?" one voice shouted. Eleanor met Mark's eyes, her lips curving into the faintest, most unguarded smile he had ever seen. "I am saying," she replied, "that sometimes the realest things begin as mistakes." That evening, back at the estate, the house felt different. The silence was lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Eleanor stood by the window, the glow of the city reflecting in her eyes. "I do not know what happens next," she said softly. Mark smiled. "Neither do I. But maybe that is the point." She turned toward him, the faintest trace of relief in her expression. "Do you regret signing that contract?" He shook his head. "It was the best mistake I ever made." For a long moment, they simply stood there. No titles, no distance, no lies. Just two people who had stopped pretending. The contract that had once defined them was gone. But something real had taken its place. And for the first time since it all began, Eleanor Brooks finally let herself believe in love. Days after the board meeting, the noise finally began to fade. The headlines slowed, the reporters moved on to new scandals, and the walls of the Brooks estate seemed to breathe again. Yet inside, everything had changed. Eleanor Brooks and Mark Davis were no longer pretending, but neither of them had said the words that both of them were afraid to speak aloud. The contract still existed, signed, dated, and sealed in a file drawer upstairs, but it no longer held the same power. It had become nothing more than paper between two people who had stopped living by it. One afternoon, Mark found Eleanor in her office, surrounded by documents and glowing screens. The sun cut through the tall windows, soft and warm across her face. She looked different now, less like a queen defending her empire, more like a woman learning how to breathe again. He stood by the door for a moment before saying, "You have not taken a break in 3 days." Without looking up, she replied, "Running a company does not stop just because people start believing in my heart instead of my numbers." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you should let them believe in both." Eleanor finally looked up. Her expression softened. "You are becoming very confident, Mr. Davis." He stepped closer. "Maybe I am just learning from you." For the first time in months, she laughed, a real, unguarded sound that filled the room. Mark sat across from her, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. It was enough just to exist in the quiet, without lies or masks. That night, Eleanor invited him to dinner in the garden. The table was lit by small candles and framed by ivy and jasmine. It felt almost unreal, like a moment out of a different life. "I used to sit out here with my father," she said softly. "He built this garden for my mother before she died. After that, no one ever used it. In thousand was I in." Mark looked around at the soft light dancing across her face. "Maybe it was waiting for you to bring it back." She smiled, but her eyes carried something deeper. "You make everything sound simple." "It is simple," he said quietly. "You just have to stop trying to fight what feels right." Eleanor set down her glass. "And what if what feels right ruins everything else?" "Then maybe everything else was never real," Mark answered. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the city beyond the gates. Then Eleanor reached across the table, her hand brushing his. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something that no contract could define. The next morning, a delivery arrived, an envelope from the company's legal department. Inside was a copy of the marriage contract, stamped with a renewal clause that would automatically extend it for another year, unless one party chose to terminate it. Eleanor stared at it for a long time before walking to Mark's study. She placed the envelope on the table between them. "Our agreement ends tomorrow," she said quietly. He looked at her, calm but steady. "Do you want it to end?" Her eyes searched his. "Do you?" Mark picked up the document, holding it between his fingers. "This piece of paper gave me a reason to stand beside you," he said. "But it is not the reason I want to stay. The balance sheet is the salaries." Without breaking eye contact, he tore the contract in half. The sound of paper ripping through the silence felt like a heartbeat breaking free. Eleanor's breath caught. "You just destroyed a legal document worth $1 million. "No," he said softly. "I destroyed the distance between us." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she took a slow step forward, her voice trembling but clear. "So what are we now, Mark Davis?" He smiled gently. "Something real." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and steady, the same way it had the day they first met. But this time, it did not feel cold. Later that night, Eleanor stood by the piano in the music room. Mark joined her, and she nodded toward the keys. "Do you remember when you told me that music does not belong in a boardroom?" He nodded. "Yes." She smiled faintly. "You were wrong." Then she sat down and began to play the same melody she had once abandoned. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, the notes warm and full of life. Mark stood behind her, watching the woman who had once been untouchable let herself be human. When the last note faded, she turned to him. "The contract is gone," she said softly, "but I am still here." He met her gaze and replied, "Then so am I. It is not being sued one's fault." For the first time, there were no conditions, no promises written in ink, just two people standing in the wreckage of something fake, choosing to build something true. The morning after Mark Davis tore the contract, the mansion felt lighter. The air that once carried tension now hummed with quiet calm. For the first time since he had moved into the Brooks estate, he woke to the smell of freshly baked bread instead of coffee and deadlines. The storm had passed outside, but something warmer remained between them, something unspoken yet undeniable. Eleanor appeared in the doorway of the dining room, no longer in her sharp suits, but in a simple ivory blouse and soft gray slacks. She looked younger, softer, almost like the woman she might have been before power had hardened her edges. "You are up early," she said. "I could not sleep," he replied, smiling faintly. "It feels strange not having a contract hanging over my head." Eleanor laughed quietly, a sound that still caught him by surprise. "I imagine freedom feels strange when you have spent so long earning it." He watched her pour coffee into 2 cups, realizing that the distance between them had vanished without either of them noticing when. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Destroying the contract?" she said, pausing. "No, but I am still learning how to live without one." In a Seuss 7 waiter in the Superinum. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavy, not with doubt, but with the weight of everything that had changed. Over the following weeks, their lives began to merge naturally. Mark accompanied her to charity meetings and company dinners, not as her pretend husband, but as her partner. The public's fascination faded. People had found a new scandal to chase, and in the quiet spaces that fame left behind, Eleanor and Mark began to build something real. But even peace had its shadows. One afternoon, Eleanor received an email from the board's legal counsel. It was brief but cutting. The renewal clause was voided without proper documentation. This could expose the company to legal scrutiny. When she read it, her hands trembled. She had spent years building an empire on rules and precision. Now, love had led her to break one. Mark found her staring at the message, her shoulders tense. "What happened?" he asked. "It is nothing," she said quickly, but her tone betrayed her worry. He took the tablet from her hands and read the email himself. "They are threatening you?" "They are warning me," she corrected. "There is a difference. I knew there would be consequences when I let go of control." Mark met her eyes. "Then let me stand with you when they come." Eleanor looked at him, the faintest trace of fear behind her calm. "I have spent my life fighting battles alone. It is not easy to let someone fight beside me." "Then do it anyway," he said softly. "You do not have to prove anything to anyone anymore." That night, she sat beside him in the garden, where they had once shared dinner under the candles. The air smelled of rain and jasmine again. "Do you know what terrifies me most?" she asked quietly. Mark shook his head. "Peace," she said. "I do not know how to live in it. I have always been running from scandal, from expectation, from loneliness." He reached for her hand, steady and warm. "Then stop running, stay." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "And if it all falls apart?" "And never after decline in dad was the prophets. Then we will build it again," he said simply. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to rest. No armor, no headlines, just quiet. As the city lights shimmered in the distance, Eleanor whispered, "You have changed everything, Mark Davis." He smiled faintly, his voice low. "Maybe I just reminded you who you were before the world told you who to be." In that moment, beneath the soft hum of the night, Eleanor Brooks finally stopped being a name on a contract or a headline in the news. She became a woman again, one who had learned that love, when it is real, does not demand perfection. It simply asks for presence. The morning after Mark Davis tore the contract, the mansion felt lighter. The air that once carried tension now hummed with quiet calm. For the first time since he had moved into the Brooks estate, he woke to the smell of freshly baked bread instead of coffee and deadlines. The storm had passed outside, but something warmer remained between them. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. Eleanor appeared in the doorway of the dining room, no longer in her sharp suits, but in a simple ivory blouse and soft gray slacks. She looked younger, softer, almost like the woman she might have been before power had hardened her edges. "You are up early," she said. "I could not sleep," he replied, smiling faintly. "It feels strange not having a contract hanging over my head." Eleanor laughed quietly, a sound that still caught him by surprise. "I imagine freedom feels strange when you have spent so long earning it." He watched her pour coffee into 2 cups, realizing that the distance between them had vanished without either of them noticing when. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Destroying the contract?" she said, pausing. "No, but I am still learning how to live without one." For a moment, the silence between them felt heavy, not with doubt, but with the weight of everything that had changed. Over the following weeks, their lives began to merge naturally. Mark accompanied her to charity meetings and company dinners, not as her pretend husband, but as her partner. The public's fascination faded. People had found a new scandal to chase. And in the quiet spaces that fame left behind, Eleanor and Mark began to build something real. But even peace had its shadows. One afternoon, Eleanor received an email from the board's legal counsel. It was brief but cutting. The renewal clause was voided without proper documentation. This could expose the company to legal scrutiny. When she read it, her hands trembled. She had spent years building an empire on rules and precision. Now, love had led her to break one. Mark found her staring at the message, her shoulders tense. "What happened?" he asked. "It is nothing," she said quickly, but her tone betrayed her worry. He took the tablet from her hands and read the email himself. "They are threatening you?" "They are warning me," she corrected. "There is a difference. I knew there would be consequences when I let go of control." Mark met her eyes. "Then let me stand with you when they come." Eleanor looked at him, the faintest trace of fear behind her calm. "I have spent my life fighting battles alone. It is not easy to let someone fight beside me." "Then do it anyway," he said softly. "You do not have to prove anything to anyone anymore." That night, she sat beside him in the garden, where they had once shared dinner under the candles. The air smelled of rain and jasmine again. "Do you know what terrifies me most?" she asked quietly. Mark shook his head. Peace, she said. I do not know how to live in it. I have always been running from scandal, from expectation, from loneliness. He reached for her hand, steady and warm. Then stop running. Stay. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. And if it all falls apart, then we will build it again, he said simply. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to rest. No armor, no headlines, just quiet. As the city lights shimmered in the distance, Eleanor whispered, "You have changed everything, Mark Davis." He smiled faintly, his voice low. "Maybe I just reminded you who you were before the world told you who to be." In that moment, beneath the soft hum of the night, Eleanor Brooks finally stopped being a name on a contract or a headline in the news. She became a woman again, one who had learned that love, when it is real, does not demand perfection. It simply asks for presence. Weeks turned into months, and life inside the Brooks estate found a rhythm that no longer felt rehearsed. The cameras stopped waiting outside the gates, the shareholders stopped whispering, and the world finally let Eleanor Brooks and Mark Davis live in peace. What had begun as a contract built on survival had become something no one could have predicted, something real, something quietly extraordinary. Eleanor had changed. The woman who once hid behind schedules, statements, and steel now spent her mornings tending to the small garden outside her office. Sometimes Mark would join her, coffee in hand, laughing when she complained about ruining another manicure on the soil. She no longer chased perfection. She chased sunlight, air, and time that felt her own. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Eleanor stood by the grand piano in the music room. It had been months since she last touched the keys, but that night, she sat down and began to play. The melody was soft and uncertain at first, then steady and full. Mark appeared in the doorway, leaning quietly against the frame, listening. "You always find your way back to music," he said gently. Eleanor smiled without turning. "It took me a while to remember that I do not need an audience to play." He stepped closer, the warm light falling across his face. "Maybe I am just lucky enough to be the one who gets to listen." It is solemn masked as in tender. She stopped playing and looked up at him, her expression tender but thoughtful. "You know," she said, "the board offered me a new deal this week. A merger, more power, more control." Mark smiled. "Let me guess you said no." She nodded slowly. "I said no, because I finally realized that having everything means nothing if you cannot choose who stands beside you when it matters." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I would say you made the right deal this time." She laughed softly, and for a moment, the entire house seemed to breathe with her. A few days later, Mark invited her to the same cafe where they had first met. The rain had returned, light and familiar, tracing silver streaks down the windows just like that night months ago. The table was the same, but everything else had changed. "I used to think this place was where my life ended," he said. "Turns out it was where everything began." Eleanor smiled, her fingers brushing against his. "I was terrified that night," she admitted. "I thought I was buying control. I never thought I was buying time long enough to fall in love." Mark looked at her, his voice quiet but certain. "We never really bought anything. We just stopped pretending that we did not need each other." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Do you ever miss the contract? The 7 to hapted firms and allables to gray." He shook his head. "No, the contract ended, but my heart never did." She reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in white paper. When he opened it, he found the gold pen she had given him on the day he signed their agreement. Its surface was still engraved with her initials. "I kept it," she said softly, not as a reminder of the deal, but of the moment everything started to change. Mark turned the pen over in his hand, the light catching its surface. "Then, maybe it is time to use it for something better." He pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket, opened it, and set it between them. Inside was a simple ring, no diamonds, no display, just quiet promise. Eleanor's breath caught. "Mark," he smiled. "This time no contracts, no conditions, just choice." Her eyes shimmered, and for the first time since the day they met, she did not try to control what came next. She nodded. "Yes," without hesitation. "Yes." Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside the little cafe, time seemed to stop. The world that had once tried to define them was gone, And what remained was simple two hearts, one promise, and a love that had outlived every rule ever written.